Hey everyone. I haven't done many of these speaking events, but I always feel like I'm the last one when I have between the audience and the alcohol. So I'll try to make this as engaging as possible. Really excited to be here. Some familiar faces, current coworkers, former coworkers in the audience, partners. So just really excited to be here. I'm here to talk about launching and managing international partnerships. My experience in partnerships has ranged a number of countries. Probably don't represent the countries that everyone here has worked with, but I've worked with a number of different regions of the country, or the world, I should say, that have very different cultures. So certainly kind of the Anglo-Saxon regions, parts of Europe, and actually a lot of this is colored by my most recent experience working with partners in Japan. Which is a critical market for Evernote. It's our second largest market. So know that I don't have kind of the experience of everyone in the room, but I think hopefully some unique tidbits that you can take back as you're thinking about working with partners in other regions. As far as agenda, want to give you just kind of a brief intro to Evernote and our partner ecosystem. Profile one of our partners in particular that we go back with many years working with in Japan. And then hopefully convey some of my tips, lessons learned, in some cases painful lessons learned, on how to work with different partners. Maybe before I do this, just a quick show of hands. Does anyone here work with partners in other countries today? Awesome. APAC? Europe? Latin America? One or two that were across the board, but a good representation. So welcome kind of your thoughts and feedback as we go along here. Evernote, many of you are probably familiar with. Is anyone using Evernote right now? That is amazing. Thank you guys so much. We are a global note and productivity application. We've been around for about 10 years, distribute worldwide. We have over 200 million users today. Some of these are what I'd call vanity metrics. The one I'm most proud of is the notes created. So we have over 9 billion notes on the platform. So for a company, that's not the big logos here that are the sponsors. That's one of the larger kind of distribution networks out there. Our most active habitual users, probably many of you here today, are driving that. So these people are using it to better their professional and their personal lives, and it's something they use day in, day out. What you may not be familiar with is we actually work with a lot of businesses as well. So we have a product called Evernote Business that we sell to primarily SMBs, but then teams within larger organizations for them to collaborate. It's essentially taking our consumer app and layering on an organization productivity collaboration layer for teams to manage their projects. And then the stat that's most relevant for today's discussion is over 80% of our user base is outside of the United States. And it really does span developed, emerging markets, developed worlds. So it's a great representation of a lot of the different types of cultures we interact with. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I just wanted to share that the partner ecosystem at Evernote is very complex. We work with a lot of different types of partners. This is a sampling, and we segment these partners in different ways. So kind of going top to bottom, we have a split between what I call technology partners and distribution partners. I think many of you probably lead that kind of hybrid world. Technology partners including integrations with other SaaS applications, the Microsoft and Google suites, Slack, and others. My colleague Manav in the audience here manages those partnerships. And then the bottom three are distribution. So how do we get to market? App stores and OEMs are massive distributors of our consumer application. We have over 60,000 installs a day of Evernote, and the majority of those are coming through those partner channels. But then we also have resellers in different parts of the world who sell not only our individual subscription, but our business product as well. So we segment partners that way. We segment them in, are they working with us from a consumer B2C capacity or a B2B kind of teams-based capacity? And then the segmentation that, again, relevant for this discussion is the horizontal one here, which is what markets are they helping us in? And the geographic cut of these partners is really important because, one, it's reflective of whatever our corporate strategy is. What markets do we want to expand into? What markets do our existing users operate in? But it's also relevant for how you think about working with different partners. What are their local cultures? Are they a global company? Or are they specializing in certain markets, certain countries? These are considerations you really need to think about. I've segmented this kind of a unique way. We have partners that we partner with here in the US, but are also global companies. So companies like Apple, Microsoft, and Google, they have obviously employees in every country in the world, but most of their partner folks that we work with, I'll give Apple as an example, their App Store team down in Cupertino, we're partnering with the US team for marketing-related initiatives, product integrations, things like that. So my team can manage that out of the US. Conversely, we have international partners who we work with in specific countries. Ingram Micro is a good example. We do work with them in the US, but we have chosen to go to market with them with our business product in very specific regions. Australia, New Zealand's an example. So we work with their local teams in those markets. And then Japan certainly fits that profile, but I've called that out specifically. It's going to be a little bit of a focus of this discussion because, one, we have a lot of partners there covering distribution, technology, but two, it is a very unique country to do business in and to partner in, and I'll share some tidbits there. Before I go into some lessons learned and how to think about entering new markets with partnerships, I wanted to do a brief profile of one of our most strategic partners, certainly our most strategic international partner. That's a company called NTT Docomo. So imagine if AT&T and Verizon merged. That's basically Docomo in the Japanese market. Over 50% market share, massive consumer brand there. They're, I think, the marquee sponsor of the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. And our partnership with them goes back a decade now. I wish I could take credit for it, but I've only been at Evernote for about 1.5 years. So I'm just trying to keep the lights on with this one. It started out with an investment. It expanded over time. They started distributing Evernote onto the mobile phones that they were selling. And then it actually really started to blossom in 2013, where we first opened up a local Japan office in Tokyo that did a number of things, but really helped nurture this partnership. And conversely, Docomo actually sent out what they would call relationship managers or trainees to the Evernote office to help manage the partnership. This is something that I think is a little bit unique to large companies in Japan, so you probably won't see this with most of your partners. But it was a great way to establish a strong working relationship with them. We actually got a lot of leverage out of some of these trainees where they were embedded in our marketing team, in our product team. They helped build campaigns that were specific to the Japan market, and they brought a lot more local knowledge than our team in the corporate office did. So just a really great period in that partnership, and we've continued to expand that. They sell our business product. We've now expanded into other markets within APAC. Now the question is, okay, how do I do this, right? This is not something that happens overnight. I think there were a couple things that really happened early on that helped launch such a strong partnership. First and foremost, executive buy-in. This is a term that you are all very familiar with any activity you're working on. But if you're thinking about entering any market, and as a piece of that, launching partnerships in that market, depending on the culture of that country and the partners, having that executive buy-in is critical. Will the executive go out, meet partners in person? In Japan, we'll talk about kind of cultural differences. Face-to-face communications is paramount. You cannot, both language as well as culture, you cannot do these types of partnerships, have them thrive remotely. So our original founding CEO, Phil, was a bit of a Japanophile, loved Japanese culture. He really drove a lot of that initial impetus. And then as our brand became bigger, we built brand equity in Japan. People came to love the elephant. It was a lot easier to build those building blocks. So started with executive buy-in, started with trust, and really grew. Brief kind of segue here before we talk about some of the lessons learned. I wanted to talk just a couple minutes about culture. Really important in working with different countries here. Has anyone read the book called The Culture Map? Wow, okay. So I would recommend this if you work with anyone on your team or in your company in another country. It's a nice to have. If you have any direct reports or work with partners in other countries, which almost everyone's hand shot up. You've got to read this book. It's by an INSEAD professor who spent a lot of her life, she's American, but she's married to a Frenchman. They live in Paris. She's traveled a lot for her work. And she's documented how different cultures impact business relationships. The spectrum here, this map isn't perfect. I actually liked hers better because in her calculation, the US is on the far left. So lowest context culture you can have. Japan is on the far right. What does that mean? It's really how context is perceived and used in communications. And that can be a number of different things. So in the US, we are a highly verbal country. You know, what's the kind of the presentation kind of rubric that I should probably be following better? It's, you know, tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. We over-communicate in the US. In Japan, if I did that in a business meeting, it would be like hitting them over the head with an anvil. They read into body language. They read into different things, what's not spoken, what's left unspoken. That's a really important part of the culture. So understanding it, it really ties to different language groups. So the Anglo-Saxon countries tend to be on the low end. It also ties to the history of the country. So Japan is an island nation. It's been around for thousands of years. They didn't open up trade to the rest of the world until about 150 years ago. So they know what it's like they know the context of their country, their fellow countrymen, and they don't have to over-communicate everything. US, on the other hand, we're a young country and we're a melting pot, right? And we have a lot of different cultures. So when you have those mixed cultures, you actually have to over-communicate to get your point across. So just remember this really important context in thinking about partnerships. The last thing I'll say here is business practices also matter. You know, Japanese culture, I've done a lot of Japanese business meetings, and I thought I had everything down, right? You kind of take the business card in two hands. You study the business card. You study it very closely. This is part of their culture. We hosted our Docomo partners, and my relationship manager was there to help host. And we welcomed them into the office. I kind of set everything up well. I did the greetings right. I put, you know, the right placement and order of seniority. And I had to step out to go get some waters for our guests and also grab my CEO to make sure he was on time to the meeting. I come back, the relationship manager had moved my computer to the other side of the table. Why is that? It's because as the host, I'm supposed to be sitting closest to the door. I thought I had everything down, and that one slipped by me. So just remember, culture, context, as well as business practices really vary when you're working with customers, partners in these countries. So let's transition here. What are some of the considerations you should think about when you enter new markets with or without partners? I always think of this in terms of what are our unique differentiators, what are our local assets? Brand equity is really important. If you're going in cold, having some level of brand equity, end customers are familiar with you. Partners have some awareness of who you are. That's really important. We're a little lucky with Evernote, given our distribution and the fact that we're more of kind of a lovable consumer brand. But this is important with B2B companies as well. And a lot of times there are ways to leverage that. And also pairing that with product market fit, understanding what your product market fit is in different countries. It actually does vary quite a bit in different countries, understanding the competitive landscape. My last company, Talkdesk, is a cloud call center software company. Sandeep, if you're very familiar with this one. Go see Sandeep speak tomorrow on professional services if you're still here. We had a nice pairing where our CEO and founder was from Portugal, and there aren't a lot of Portuguese startups, so everyone in the startup community knew Talkdesk. On top of that, the competitive landscape was wide open. Legacy players, there were really no cloud players in our space, and so we were able to leverage both of those to have a really good impact in Portugal. Having a local team, really important as well. You can't always be blessed with having a partnership person in a country, but you might have go-to-market resources. Can you leverage salespeople? Can you leverage marketing people to localize content? Can you localize language support and customer support? All of those things can really help you get a foothold as you're launching partnerships. Localized tech, I'll just spend a second here. This is really the ability to localize your app, website, SEO, things like that, and optimize it to a local language. Kind of a key takeaway for me on this is that works well to a degree. So You can localize your tech. It's a good way to build user acquisition in new countries. But things like customer support can't really localize that well, especially in those high context countries. With Evernote, we actually pulled back some of our international resources last year when we did a restructuring. We eliminated our Japanese customer support. Within 2 months, our TNPS went hugely negative. That was the key metric we tracked for customer support and satisfaction ratings. And we realized, the translation service we were using for support was not acceptable in Japan. If you ever have a Japanese contract or language and put it into Google Translate, I challenge you to try to figure out what it says. You cannot localize through a translation bot that kind of language. And we also didn't have the right hours to support the business customers. So we quickly fixed that, or on the path to fixing that, and applying dedicated Japanese support. And then physical assets can also be a local asset for you. If you, maybe you're a B2B company that's leveraging data centers in specific countries. Countries like Japan that really, or not Japan, Germany, that really value privacy. We have a country manager in Switzerland that refers to this dynamic as Trump land. So I won't try to get political here, but what he would say is, Craig, we cannot sell Evernote Business to companies above 20 employees in Germany or Switzerland because they think Trump and the NSA are reading all of their notes. So you got to understand kind of the local considerations there, as well as things like the ability to transact commerce billing systems in different currencies, the ability to have different corporate entities and optimize tax regimes. All of these things are true for any kind of market entry strategy, but certainly are relevant to partnerships as well. So a few closing comments here. Lessons learned. I think we hit the first one pretty hard, but executive buy-in, not just upfront, but ongoing. Japan is a really kind of a core strategic initiative for Evernote, and I will be employing executives at the company to periodically go visit our customers and partners in Japan. It's not just the initial setup. You need that ongoing, depending on the culture and the context of the countries you're working with, and the partners, obviously. Understanding the culture map. Really, you guys got to read this book for anyone working with partners in other countries. Getting creative with resources. I think this is a good takeaway again. Just for BD and partnership people in general, our teams tend to be pretty lean and mean. You're having to leverage marketing, partnerships, sales, all kinds of functional teams. Do that in international locations as well. Work with your local salespeople. Change their comp plan if you have to. Make them, or dedicate them to indirect, whatever it is. Make sure that you're set up for success. At Evernote, we get real scrappy. We're lucky in that we have a pretty rabid user community in a lot of our countries that we work in. And in Japan specifically, there's hundreds of folks who are really excited to talk shop about Evernote. And so we leverage the community. My peer in partner marketing, she leverages the community to drive partner webinars, to host partner events. They can be our brand ambassadors, an extension of our team when we don't have as many direct resources to really work well in that country. Localization tools, employ them. They work to a limit, especially within the tech side of the house. But if you need partner support, partner engagement, timely partner support, you're probably going to need to have folks who are dedicated to those languages, to those time zones. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the country, but if they can at least service the time zone, that business hours for that country, there are ways to kind of hack your way through that. And then I put this last because it's obviously the biggest nice to have, but if you really are serious about being effective in a country, you got to consider hiring local. I know a lot of us work at relatively smaller companies, again, compared to some of the larger sponsors here. Those sponsors have boots on the ground, armies of them, and they are top of mind with your partners, they're top of mind with your customers. The only way to support that locally, if you really are serious, whether it's through language, time zone support, or just staying top of mind, is really investing in the local market. It's a bigger cost. It's a bigger investment consideration, a bigger ask for the executive team. But like I said, if it is a strategic initiative for the company, it's something you should definitely consider. So I'm happy to chat at drinks if people are tired of me speaking, but can also answer questions as well.
letting you off the hook that easily without at least a question, Craig. But speaking of, I know I've got a couple, but questions from the room for Craig. Okay, I will stand in the way of drinks. Most of the time, when you think about an expansion strategy, particularly into new countries, I think most of our experience has been, well, what is the next easiest country to get to based on the opportunity that we have? And probably a lot of those things are around kind of context and culture and market size. Doesn't sound like Japan was the next, maybe like the next closest country that maybe I, at least in my mind, would have thought of moving into from an American or Anglo-Saxon-based company. So why Japan, and what has the payoff been for you guys based on kind of how you initially thought about the expansion strategy?
Yeah, so I can take a stab at that. I wasn't there for the initial market entry, so it's kind of me reading the tea leaves and talking to colleagues. Part of it was just executive interest and personal interest in Japanese culture, but we also did have a strong base of free users in Japan when we entered the market. And so that's how a lot of how we think about things at Evernote is, okay, how do we monetize this, right? That's what we're all here for, especially in the BD world. And so one of the ways we look through that lens is what is the current user base, what's their likelihood to pay, to convert, and through those metrics, Japan was really interesting. And from an ROI perspective, it's highly positive. So we now have a staff of a few people out there, but like I said, it's our second largest market. Think double-digit ARR, and a ton of partners that help drive that. So I think it was a wise decision up front.
And last question. Any surprises that caught you off? Obviously, surprises catch you off guard, but any surprises that you found going into the Japanese market that you will take and apply to new markets that you expand into?
I think this doesn't fully address your question. I'll do my best here, but we made a strategic misstep with a kind of a corporate goal of break-even profitability of pulling back in some of our regional markets. And I think earlier days, and again, I wasn't there, so this is just me kind of reading the tea leaves, but Evernote raised a ton of money, really overinvested, all different types of products. We opened up offices in like 10 countries. It was crazy for a startup of our size, a few hundred people. And because of that, there was a large pullback. And I think the problem is you've got to really be focused on what are the core markets you're targeting on. It was the right move to pull back in some of our international markets. It was the wrong move to pull back in our second largest market that requires, because of the context, local resources. And so I think, to me, it's partnerships in general. Manav and I spent a lot of time managing, unwinding, building old partnerships. Think very strategically when you're building a new partnership about you're going to have to manage that down the line. Are you in the right market? Is it the right partner? Are you going to be able to dedicate the resources to properly manage that beyond the first year and the first kind of go-to-market launch? Be really cognizant early on in that.
Thanks, Craig. Will you all thank Craig for me for this afternoon?